Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Judy. And what Judy is essentially about is basically we center on an aging Judy Garland, and she is at probably one of the worst times of her life. She's trying to get out of this custody battle with her ex-husband and things like that, but she also is going through many substance abuses, and she has this tour coming up in London, and basically we follow her throughout this tour as her condition starts to worsen, and basically she starts to take a toll for the worse, but she tries to hold on as much as she can, and that's really all I'm going to say. So Judy, overall, I was very excited for this film. If you guys know, Judy Garland is probably my favorite actress of all time, but I also think she's one of the greatest performers to ever live. I think she is just... There's no one that has ever been like her. She just had such a certain charm and a certain wit to her that I just think other performers just haven't lived up to. And her story is one that, as tragic as it is, I've always found endlessly fascinating. And it's one that I've loved to see turned into a feature film someday. So knowing that there was going to be a biopic about her coming out, I was very much down for it. I was very excited to see how this would turn out. I was really hoping this could be a very emotional look at what she really went through. And while Judy definitely does have its moments, I'm sorry to say that as a film, this is not the definitive biopic that I would have wanted. I think Judy definitely does fall flat in quite a few areas. It definitely has its ups for sure, which we'll get into. But as a whole, this was a very disappointing film for me. But we'll just get into right now, starting off with the cast. And that's easily the best thing about this film. I mean, most of the cast here is really great. I think everyone does do a really great job, but easily the best thing about the entire film has to be the lead performance here by Renée Zellweger, who I'll just say right now, I've never really been that big of a fan of. I think that she is an alright actress, but most things I've seen her in, I just don't think she's that great. That is until this film. I mean, she absolutely kills it here, and all of the praise that she's received is very much warranted. This is a career-defining performance for her, and there is not a single second of this movie where you do not buy her as Judy. She completely transforms into this role. She's got the essence down perfectly. She's got the innocence down, but she also just has the love that Judy has for everyone down. I think she did that very well here. I loved her portrayal as Garland. I think she really honored this Judy Garland's legacy quite well. I really love what she ended up doing here. There's so many scenes where she shines, so many scenes that are just screaming for her to get an Oscar, and I really hope that is the case. I could very much see her getting nominated. I think she gives one of the best performances of the entire year, and I hope moving forward she continues to take challenging roles like this one, because she very much has the capability to do so, and I absolutely loved what I saw of her here. I was very skeptical of her initial casting, but honestly, after this film, I can't really see a better person to play Judy Garland than Zellweger, because I think she absolutely just killed it here. The rest of the cast here is fine for the most part. I think everyone does do a good job. Jessie Buckley, I've always really liked her, and she does do a really solid job here. Rufus, Sewell, I thought was pretty good overall. Michael Gambon. Finn Wittrock was a mixed bag for me. At first, I thought he did a really good job, and then I thought he became way too over the top towards the film's third act, so he was very on and off for me. The child performances, though, that's where this film does falter. I really didn't think they were all that great. The younger actress playing Lorna Luft was very monotone and almost robotic. I really didn't think she was all that great. But then there's Darci Shaw, who, as much as she tries, she really does try to capture the young Judy Garland. She just fails miserably. It doesn't help that she looks absolutely nothing like Garland did at that age. Very much at all. And at least Zellweger, like, she tried to look like her. You know, Shaw, they don't even try to make... I mean, there's a scene where she, like, dives into a pool, and it is so not Judy Garland, it's not even funny. Like, it was really bad casting, and I thought she overall was just kind of flat. I really did not think she was that great in this role. I thought she was honestly kind of miscasted. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about the acting. Other than Zellweger, nobody really sticks out as much as her, but nobody is really all that bad either. It's just nothing really that amazing. But now we have to get to the directing and the writing, which, sadly, that's where we get to the real problems with this film. The directing here Look, when it comes to a biopic about Judy Garland, all I'm really expecting is for some director to come in with a vision, someone that cares about Judy Garland, and this is for any biopic, someone who very much cares about the subject that it's portraying and really tries to add their own flair to it. And as much as Rupert Goold tries, I don't think he was the right choice here. And I think this is the problem with it. It's not so much that he didn't have a vision, because I think he did. It's that his style doesn't really work for movies, and that's mainly because I was checking out like his IMDb and things like that. This guy has mainly done stage plays, and it very much does show, because this movie is actually based off a stage play, and more than often, it very much does feel directed like one as well, and I just don't think he did a very good job with directing this film. The tone is honestly kind of jumbled, especially when it goes from the past to the present. When it's in the present, it has this sort of cynical type feel to it. It's a lot, it's not afraid to be a lot of fun. It definitely does have some moments there. It definitely does get dramatic for sure, but it has more of a fun tone. When it's in the past, it's like a full-on melodrama, and it just didn't really work for me all that well. I think he had a really hard time balancing the tones, and I just didn't think he had enough of a style to this film. And I kept thinking about how much better this film would be if you had more of a styled, seasoned director. I think that's what they really need. They need a better director to really latch onto this project and make it something great, and unfortunately for Goold, it just didn't really happen here. But the writing is easily, though, the biggest problem with this film. I think the writing just falls very flat in many areas, because here's the thing. Judy Garland is someone that I think was a very complex individual. She's someone who, yes, she was a performer, and yes, she was very good at it, but she also was very much forced into performing, and her entire life she never really got to experience life because of the fact that she was always performing. That was always getting in the way. People were always manipulating her, and especially towards this part of her life, this is when she was in her darkest times, struggling with substance abuse, going through a reason to live, having this crippling depression throughout her life, constantly just thinking she's a failure and things like that, having all this shit just catch up to her. And what does this film reduce it to? Basically just a very simplistic story of her having these custody battles with her ex-husband, her having to be away from her kids because she's on tour, and her basically being broke and drinking because of the pressure and things like that. And that's really it. And that's easily the biggest problem with this film. I just think the story is far too simplistic for a Judy Garland biopic. I don't think it really honors her legacy all that well. This was far more of a complex issue than the film really touches upon, and it doesn't do a very good job, I think, of respecting her. It feels very half-assed in that way, like they were just focused on telling the simplest story possible, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact this is based on a play. And look, when it comes to stage plays and musicals, yeah, sometimes they do have a rather simplistic plotline, but it works for that specific medium. And I think this is just one of those cases where it just did not translate well, and I think they needed to do something different. I don't think this should have been an adaptation of that play. I think that this should have been its own thing, and I think that's ultimately what does hurt this film, because the plot itself just isn't very interesting. It's a lot of repetitiveness of Judy having to perform, and her getting cold feet, or her drinking, or her being, or her being drunk on stage, and her getting heckled, and then you have her, complaining that she's not getting to see her kids, and her wanting to get out of this tour, and it's just a lot of repetitiveness, and it just ultimately does not make for a very compelling narrative in that way. There are things that I cared about for sure. I definitely did like the stuff with her and her kids. There's a very effective scene where she's trying to call up her daughter, and you can see the real pain in her voice, knowing that she might not be able to see her again. I mean, it's very tragic stuff, but it just doesn't feel as tragic as it should, especially because it's supposed to be Judy Garland on like her last few months of living. It never really feels that way. I don't really think they leaned into that as well as they could have, and as a result, it just makes for a film that just isn't particularly interesting, and I think that does hurt it for sure. And then the flashbacks should be the most interesting part of the film. That should be the thing that I really latch onto, and unfortunately, it is incredibly over the top. The way they play things up here, it's honestly very hard to take seriously at points. They do get into the fact that Judy Garland was very much manipulated and possibly also sexually harassed by Louis B. Mayer, and that he coaxed her into performing and made her think that's all that matters and didn't really let her do anything else besides that. And again, this stuff is important, but the film barely scratches the surface of it. And because of that, and they don't really bring it up in the present day either. That's not really something that Judy seems to be struggling with. Like, the past gets into the idea that Judy was struggling with substance abuse, but this film passes it off as nothing more than just Judy is stressed, so she drinks and things like that. They don't really make it seem as much of a serious issue as it should. So because of that, the flashbacks end up feeling rather unnecessary and honestly could have been cut from the film altogether. And I hate saying that because I think it should be the most interesting part of the movie, but they don't do a really good job with factoring that in. There's really only one scene where I'm like, okay, that actually could have built on something. That could have actually led to something great, but unfortunately, it just didn't overall. And the various plot lines that Judy's dealing with here, I also just didn't really care about. The stuff with her and Finn Wittrock's character, Mickey Dean, yes, she did end up with him. Yes, he was someone she was in a relationship with, but the way they handle it, at first I didn't mind. I didn't mind where they were going at first, but where he ends up going is unfortunately where you would expect his character to go, and that's something I was very disappointed by. He went in a very cliche direction, and it was just... it really left me very disappointed, left me scratching my head as to why they even needed him in this movie. What was really the point of him? What were they trying to do? There's a lot of characters that are like that. Jessie Buckley ends up contributing almost nothing other than the fact that she's just another female character for Judy to talk to every so often. That's really why she's here. There's a lot of characters that very much end up amounting to nothing, and it just really does hurt the film overall. The film also feels very Hollywoodized in that way. There's many scenes here that just they don't feel like something that would have actually happened. The ending especially is so cheesy. It's so cheesy, and I should feel something, because again, I adore Judy Garland. I think she's one of the best performers out there, so you would think that I would feel something, but because the way it's handled, I thought it was so over the top and ridiculous, and I just, it was very hard to take seriously, honestly. I did not like the way this movie ended at all. It really did not work for me. So yeah, the story itself, it's just kind of bland. It really doesn't do a very good job of honoring her legacy. It has its moments, but overall, just didn't really do all that much for me. The cinematography here, though, is fantastic, definitely. I think the film has a very nice look to it, for sure, especially once you're on the stage. I mean, you really do feel like you're right there, and those are easily the best scenes of the movie, are the scenes that are part of the concert, and where you feel like you're there with the audience, and they do a really good job with showing the type of performer that Judy Garland was, how well she connected with audiences and things like that, and that's something I thought that was very spot on. The score here is fantastic. I very much like the score, and I mean, it's great to hear Renée Zellweger singing all these Judy Garland classics, and she does such a great job with honoring that for sure. And the editing, I think ultimately this film was just way too short. There are a lot of things here that just feel severely underwritten that I would have really wanted to get into more, and I think the film would have benefited, honestly, if it was more of a straight-up biopic of Judy Garland. I know I've said you don't want to make every biopic like that, but I think for a Judy Garland film, you need to do that, because the story you want to tell, it starts in her childhood, and I think this entire film should have been just Judy's life, not just her life at this time, because her life at this time, at least the way it's told, is not particularly interesting, but if you would have focused on Judy, as a kid and then built up to it, then I think it could have been genuinely interesting. I never thought I'd say this, but there is a mini-series on ABC about Judy Garland. I watched it a couple years ago, so maybe it doesn't hold up as much, but that, I think, got a lot more out of me than this ended up doing. I mean, the things that this told me are things I pretty much already knew, and maybe that's just because I know a lot about Judy Garland. I mean, I have a book, there's like a book I have about her and everything that talks about that kind of stuff, so like, maybe that's why I'm being a little too critical towards this, but I just felt this could have been so much more. Ultimately, Judy is not a bad film. It's just a film that I think should be a lot better. Judy Garland was so extraordinary in that way, and she was such a larger-than-life figure. So to have a film that just feels so generic and honestly kind of Oscar baity at points was very disappointing, to say the least. I think there are things here that really could have worked. Zellweger absolutely kills it in this role. She was very much game here. There are scenes that she very much does kill. There are things that do work. Like I said, the stuff with her and her kids, there's scenes that are definitely very effective, but then there are scenes that just creep too much into melodrama, and I just don't think the film handled that very well. The story isn't very interesting. The directing feels very, it just doesn't feel like it has much of a style to it. I think it definitely needed more of a flair. So ultimately, I think this is a film that very much could have worked, but ultimately just didn't. I think there's a lot here that I think could have been expanded upon, and I think if it was, this could have been a much better film. But as it is now, I was severely disappointed by Judy overall. So I am going to give Judy a C. But over, guys, in my review of Judy, let me know what you guys saw this movie overall, loved your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.